Hey there, and welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And Emily Cherkin is back. Emily, thank you for coming back.
You're welcome.
You are known as the screen time consultant. And do you want to tell folks just a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I have a teaching background, spent 12 years teaching middle school, mostly middle school English. And now I work with parents, schools, anybody who's interested really to sort of move towards what I call tech intentionality. So really the TLDR version of my approach is later is better, less is more, relationships first. And yeah, that's it. That's the short version.
And for more, because we did actually record an episode kind of about your book and about your
Yeah.
approach. And so
Yeah.
folks should absolutely go listen to that one. Not
Yeah.
necessarily first, but maybe after.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk about tech in schools.
Yes.
And
Yes.
why are we going to do that, Emily?
Because it's a growing beast in and of itself. It's something I became aware of. I mean, look, we all had variations of like computer lab in school growing up. And of course, it was like once a week, 30 minutes, you'd go trudge to the lab, that kind of thing, until around the early 2000s probably. And then it became, maybe there was a classroom computer or a laptop cart. That was certainly in my teaching career from 2003 to 2015. It was a laptop cart, and I taught seventh grade English. So, my students would use it for word processing, but that was kind of the gist of it. But about 10 years ago, we started to see an uptick in use of tech for things like grading, posting grades online, posting assignments, asking students to download or read online for homework. And for me as a parent, I became aware of it actually exactly 10 years ago when my son was in kindergarten, came home the first day of school with a piece of paper that said, "Mom, I have to learn this." And it was Control Alt Delete. And I thought, he doesn't even know how to write his own name, let alone what Control Alt Delete on a computer keypad is. And the reason he had to do it, and this was a public school, was so that he could log in to the standardized tests that were required by the district that were now all digitized.
Well, okay,
So,
there's so much to unpack here.
yes.
And actually where I might start is just
Yeah.
and jump in here. The motor skills alone
Uh-huh.
to accomplish said task. And
Uh-huh.
let's start and stop with Control Alt Delete. Such a great example.
Yep.
For a 5-year-old
Right.
is inappropriate.
Yes. Thank you.
Developmentally
Yes.
inappropriate.
Right.
So, okay, let's just go there now,
Yeah.
because I suspect you've got a lot to say about this. How does tech cover up, ignore, not dovetail with what we know about
Optimal development.
yeah, let's call it all areas of development, but like fine motor development, gross motor development, cognitive development. Like, how does that work,
Yeah.
Emily?
Well, in a nutshell, I would argue it's inappropriate, it's too soon, it's too much, and it interferes with optimal development. With a big caveat, I'm going to say this up front, which is that for some children, a tech-based tool might be a game changer for the learning environment. I'm thinking voice to text, I'm thinking nonverbal autism, I'm thinking a family member of mine has diabetes and uses a glucose monitor on a cellular device. That makes perfect sense to me. That is a tool to support something that otherwise would make school very difficult for children. But as I always say, just because one child needs glasses in the classroom does not mean the entire class needs glasses. And what we have done is give kids as young as 5 glasses, even with or without needs, vision needs. And what I mean by that is we now see iPads coming home with kindergartners, and they are reading on iPads, or learning to read, I should say. And again, I probably don't need to tell you this, but from the fine motor tactile thing, we're talking a 2-dimensional screen is a very different experience than holding a physical book. I've been in touch with several occupational therapists who talk about the fact they used to help kids with handwriting. Now they're teaching children to turn the pages of a book. Children don't know how to turn book pages because
Like
they
physical
don't
book
grow
pages.
the physical book pages because they are so used to tapping and swiping. And again, this isn't necessarily even parent. I mean, yes, young birth to 5 kids are having screen time in massive more quantities than they used to, but it's also coming to school. And instead of, all of the messy cutting and pasting and gluing and, shapes and all of that tactile stuff, which isn't about the messy piece of paper they come home with and is everything about the skill that goes into it, that's not happening. It's much less messy and much more convenient to be like, use this app on your iPad to manipulate these shapes and put them in. Is it teaching them something? I mean, yeah, how to manipulate shapes on a 2-dimensional screen, but it is not having that same impact developmentally as that 3-dimensional experience is.
And so I just want to like break this down in the way that I see it to
Yeah.
explain to people who don't think about this in the way, like as much or as in the way that we
Yeah.
do, why it's a potentially a problem. Because you and I are both people who, what we're not trying to do here is like run screaming that the sky is falling.
Right.
And what we do want to do is understand, or at least raise some awareness.
Yes.
There are consequences to, for example, 5-year-olds only knowing how to do math, for example, on a 2D screen.
Right.
And the reason that that's problematic is because we live in a 3D world where there is depth and texture and movement, physics, right? Basic laws of physics that, and I love the way you said that, because honestly, when babies first arrive as infants, literally what they are doing is experimenting with the laws of physics.
Yes.
And if we prevent brains from experiencing the laws of physics, which is essentially what we're doing when we're bypassing with technology, we are shutting off neural pathways that otherwise would have been created that now are not being created. And we don't really know what the implications are. Well, we're starting to know what the implications are.
Well, yes. So all of this, and again, I always say I'm not anti-tech, but I am tech intentional, right? And to me and to you, it is developmentally absurd to make a 5-year-old do Control Alt Delete as their first lesson in kindergarten. And one of the issues and complaints I have is like, for whom is this tech, right? This is not about what is best for children. It is about what is most convenient for a large school district that wants to, do standardized testing. We could do a whole nother podcast about my opinions on standardized testing too. But while they used to be a tool that we would use occasionally, there's something like between kindergarten and 12th grade, kids are taking something like 100 different standardized tests now in public schools in America. It's just constant testing. And of course, as a result, that's shifted education. So teachers now are pressured to teach to the test. I also want to be really clear. I am not blaming teachers. Have been one, done that. It is not often a teacher's decision to do a lot of this. And as a teacher myself, a lot of the professional development that I was exposed to starting in 2003 when I entered the classroom was STEAM, STEM, all of this pro tech. It's so great. It's the future of education. But it's complicated, as is many things in life related to technology. But it's not just about how you teach or what you teach. It's the tool itself, right? So it's one thing for me as a teacher to move from using a paper grade book to an online one, which, by the way, I hated because I loved roaming around my classroom with my grade book and I could just check quickly and see what kids were working on. And then if a kid came to talk to me, I could open it and I could show them the line and we could talk about it. By moving me to the computer, you took me out of roaming around the classroom. You asked me to upload stuff that now parents have access to. So now I'm not hearing from students anymore. I'm getting emails from parents asking why little Johnny got a B- on his vocab test rather than Johnny coming to talk to me to ask about that. So we have that problem. So initially that tech in the classroom was actually driven towards teachers about how we can teach more creatively or effectively. We had whiteboards turn into smart boards, right? Which was I mean, I have strong opinions about that. I did not think it improved my teaching. I can see how a math teacher, and I always get pushback from math teachers, I can see how writing up some notes and equations and practicing things on a whiteboard that's a smart board that can translate it to notes for students could be helpful. I think that could be a helpful tool, but it's not necessary. We've taught math for decades, centuries, without having a smart board. So that didn't change that what we taught. It was the how we taught. But then what we did was we were like, oh, these tools for teachers, why don't we just give these tools directly to the students? So that became asking them to log in to things like Schoology or learning management systems where they could see assignments and grades. And the idea was a kid's home sick during the day, they can just log on and look. But behind the scenes on that, that meant me as a teacher, now I have double work. Now I have to not only do it in my grade book, I have to upload it to the assignment. I have to make sure the PDFs are the right form. More work for me as a teacher, right? And now kids have this device. And that we used to be just in the classroom. Now they're coming home back and forth to them. And now they're having them as young as kindergarten. So, I mean, to me, the tsunami, somebody described it as holding back a tsunami with sandbags. We're just being deluged by all of the tech. And a little bit's okay.
A little bit's okay, right. Well, and the interesting part about tech is always that it's evolving faster than we can track. And
exactly,
there's so much of it. And so there's always a little bit of bright, shiny object syndrome where it's like, oh, this
totally.
is new, it must be better. As you were talking about, you being behind the computer, I mean, the other thing that really happens in what is meant to be a relationship-based environment is that tech is actually removing you physically from the relationship. Now, we know that relationships can be virtual. This is happening over virtual, format. That's lovely. But, particularly for children, do we want that to be the primary way that they get connection? Do we want an online or digitally mediated format to be the primary way that they get interaction with their primary caregivers, which, by the way, if you're a kindergarten teacher, you are a primary caregiver of a child.
Amen.
So there's that question. So no, right?
Right.
Then there's the other, and I heard you say it, this notion that we have to teach the task of technology in order to teach the lesson, instead of just teaching the lesson. Now, you said it before, I'm going to say it again here. There are kids for whom the technology enables their ability to learn the lesson. Okay, so let's absolutely acknowledge that. And some of the people listening here will have kids who are reliant on technology to access the curriculum. And isn't it fantastic that we have that? But to your earlier point, we don't give everybody classes because one kid can't see. And so there's that piece of it. And by the way, even for those kids, we take a developmental approach.
I was going to say,
we don't teach 5-year-olds a text-based communication. We don't teach 5-year-olds to type words. We teach 5-year-olds to access picture communication if they are non-speaking. Right? We don't expect somebody with cerebral palsy to be able to type on a computer. We use different forms of access for that. But that's highly individualized, and it's highly tailored to their needs in a way that it keeps the end in mind, which is, I want you to learn this material. And it strikes me that what you're describing is we've completely bypassed what we want kids to learn. Like the end, we've lost sight of the end.
Yeah, and there's such a paradox here too, because, well, there's several. A lot of the earlier tech movement into education was in the name of equity and closing what we call the digital divide. That was true historically. Even when I was teaching and we were asking kids to log in on computers at home to look at their homework, we were presuming that those families had computers at home, which was not always true, right? That's a problem. That is no longer what the digital divide looks like. It is not now a question of access. It's actually almost the opposite. We're looking at communities that are disproportionately harmed. So low income, families of color, poverty, all of those issues that have presented barriers in the past, those are the populations now who are spending the highest amounts of time on screens. And not just for school, we're talking outside of school time too. And this is another distinction, even pre-pandemic, when I was talking to parents, it would be like, I'm worried about my kid coming home from school and spending 2 or 3 hours on a screen. Oh, those were the good old days, because those kids weren't spending time on screens at school. What's happening now is some schools, especially the tech heavy ones, kids are spending 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day on screens at school, then coming home being asked to do schoolwork or homework online for homework, in addition to whatever personal devices they have or entertainment. So we've gone from a few hours a day in the afternoon to 6, 7, 8, 10 hours a day on digital devices. I don't know anyone, even those who aren't experts in education, who would say that's a good idea for young children.
Well, and this is where also I think there's starting to be this disconnect where we're anesthetized to the effect
Yes.
of screens a little bit, because as you were talking, I was like, well, yeah, my husband I spend sometimes 8, 10 hours at a work day
Right.
seated
Right.
at a computer. Now, the
Totally.
difference is, let's talk about brains for a second. Frontal lobes are not
Yep.
fully cooked until
Yep.
in typically developing brains until about age 26. If you've got
Right.
any kind of neurodivergence, that number goes closer to 30.
I know.
So,
Amazing.
right? So now let's talk about like do we even know? And this honestly, Emily, is like, it's a huge problem in many areas of life, which is we do not account for children's nervous systems or brains
Oh, yeah.
in any of the research, really.
No,
And
no. And
so,
children's brains are not adult brains, to your point. Like, this is the problem. Like, how many of us over the fully cooked brain part, over 26, both of us, I imagine, at this point in life, how many of us struggle to minimize our screen time, stop our scrolling, not play next episode on Netflix? We have fully formed brains and we struggle. So then I go, how on earth are we handing out these devices with the same algorithms built in, the same persuasive design techniques molded into it, and expect children to do better? It's never going to be that way. And to me, the fact that we are handing them out as young as kindergarten, and in some cases, I've heard of tech-based preschools, which is horrifying, or online preschool. Yep. Yep. Head Start, there was a couple, anyway, the whole different, like, this was during COVID too. And again, as I always say, like, look, tech, the spring of 2020 was the lifeboat we needed to stay connected to our teachers and our peers. But a lifeboat is not long-term housing. We cannot live in a lifeboat. And so that's what we are justifying, is like, oh no, we're still living in a lifeboat. And, I get it. There's a lot of complexity to this. Tech, districts bought lots of tech, millions of dollars worth of tech during COVID. They can't just walk away, or taxpayers are going to be upset about it, rightfully so. But that doesn't mean we need to keep pounding that hammer. And what I'm hearing now that's really frustrating to me, again, as a former teacher, is like, well, these poor teachers, they have such big class sizes. They're so overworked. There's not enough school counselors. We need to help them differentiate. So as opposed to, the occasional student like you described, who has that very highly specialized need, where we meet their need with a tech-based tool that makes perfect sense for their situation. Now teachers are being told, well, just take the tech you have and differentiate within that. You can tap little Johnny to read a 4th grade book on his iPad reader program, and this other kid reading at a 6th grade level can access it this way. And look, lo and behold, look what the teacher can do. Rather than saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't give teachers 30 kids, or maybe we should add extra staff in a school so that they can do pullouts and help kids who need reading support. Like, to me, it is mind-boggling that we're throwing all that money to the tech as the solution rather than reinvesting it in the school. Because who benefits when we invest in the tech? It's not the teachers, it's not the kids, the tech companies.
well,
And to me, that's
this is where
problematic.
it really is problematic. And back to my earlier sort of point about kids in general, right? Children have no income. Children have no voting capacity.
Nope.
Children are stewards of adults, and children are not making the decisions. And so they are a population that consistently gets sort of co-opted and pushed out of any kind of conversation around how things are going to happen. And their needs are not, sort of their developmental needs are not being considered. So it is, it's a perfect storm of, and this has been happening, by the way, like for millennia. So like, this is not new. Sarah Ockwell Smith calls it childism, which I think is a really interesting concept, actually.
Ooh, yes.
There are some other issues with that term, but like, that's fine. That is what it is. But it's, children have very little voice. And in a world where like, we're increasingly kind of bright, shiny object, tech driven, running around because there's so much muchness. We're not necessarily minding the store. So
no, and it makes me so angry. To your point about children as stewards of adults, we really are the representatives of children. Like, we make decisions on their behalf, whether as parents or as teachers or even politicians. And the problem with that is there are people who aren't doing that in alignment with what we know about learning and development. And so the fact that we are letting technologists dictate what looks like good learning or teaching because it's profitable for them is beyond unethical in my mind, right? And we haven't even gotten to some of the dystopian elements of this, which is that data is incredibly valuable to tech companies. And we are talking about schools using, on average, 125 to 150 unique ed tech platforms per school. There is no way that a school, a teacher, a district has any concept of how much data, information, and some of it, people are like, oh, data, eye roll. Google knows everything I'm doing. And yet, technically, I'm a consenting adult when I log into my Google Mail, right? Like, a child is doing it because a teacher has said this is what we're doing. Parents have no idea that this is happening behind the scenes. And my little quip is that it's, big ed tech is just big tech in a sweater vest.
Really funny, actually.
It's the same algorithm. It's the same data mining practices. It's the same persuasive design elements guised in education. Okay. And okay.
So here's the risk. Anytime we like look in the box, we're like, oh God, the box, it's so big. It's so ugly. We want to close the box. So the question is, what can we do? What can we do? Given that this situation exists?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, most people are shocked to hear any of this because they have no idea. So awareness is number one. Just know that it's happening. Also, I don't want to be too much of a troublemaker, and I believe very firmly in approaching a school with curiosity, not judgment, being an ally to whatever your teacher is doing, because again, please don't go straight to the teacher and, bite their head off, because this is often not their decision. But approach, again, my favorite thing, curiosity, ask questions, approach as an ally, build your awareness. Say to the teacher, I'm curious about how much time the kids are going to spend on iPads during the day. I just want to know can you give me a ballpark? Or is there an option if we're doing a reading platform that I can request paper books? It is laughable that I am in a position today of telling parents you can ask for paper and pencil in school. How did we get to a place where that was considered an act of rebellion to ask for a pencil and paper? But we can. And I think, again, I'm always encouraging parents to approach this as a collective action too, that this is not just about my precious little child, although it is initially, but this is what's best for all children. Again, with the exception of what we talked about earlier, but like, we really have to approach this and say, is this developmentally appropriate? Is this in alignment with what we know children need to learn? You said relationships, IRL, in real life relationships. Learning happens in the context of relationships with people. It doesn't matter. You know, the content is just a vehicle for the skills. We have got to make sure that there is a human interacting with our kids. The other thing I see, and it really concerns me, and I'm not sure parents are always aware of, is like, you know, if you've got a kid who does fine in school, like flies under the radar, or you know, maybe he's even accelerated, what often ends up happening is they get pitched the devices to keep them busy because they're not causing issues. They are ahead of the game, or maybe it comes easily to them. That's not developmentally good for those kids either. And so we have to ask those questions again without judgment, with curiosity. So that's my, you know, I'm not suggesting we storm the castle just yet, but you know, start by just maybe asking a few of those questions, because it's changing fast. It's changing fast.
Yeah, and starting to think really holistically about, I think, the number of hours that
Yeah.
that screens are actually happening. I mean, this, I
Yeah.
think on the home side, right? If your child, if one's child attends a school that is tech mediated, or using a lot of tech, that probably is and should change your math about how much screen time they get at home, potentially.
Yeah.
And just being aware of those kinds of things. I mean, there's a high school right down the street from my house. They give all the students, it's now, again, it's high school, so okay. All the students have Chromebooks
Yeah.
with internet,
Yep.
with all their assignments. And for kids who struggle with focus,
I was just going to add that. Yep.
you know, and listen, it's the way it's sold. And I have a couple of friends who go there. The way it's sold is, it's so great. Kids can't lose their homework. It's so great. It's all in there for them. But what's also in there for them is the whole darn
Internet. Well, that's it. I mean, to me, I've heard the argument, oh, well, now kids don't have to lug heavy books back and forth. What? I mean, first of all, that's a rite of passage in childhood, right? Losing your homework and learning to not lose your homework is a skill. Those are things that, you know, to me, the tech displaces these absolutely critical life skills. And this is the problem. You know, tech gets pitched to us as this solution. It's going to make life less full of friction. And yet learning happens in friction. Kids need to like struggle a little bit. They need to be messy and lose their homework a little bit. And like, I agree that the distraction piece is huge. I do not believe, and I've heard from so many teachers, the argument that it is a benefit outweighs the distraction risk, because kids are not, I mean, double screening or triple screening, you know, where they pop one window up and they know how to toggle between them when a teacher walks by. That's not new. That's been happening for 20 years. And the problem now is YouTube. That's the number one question I would ask is, do my kids have access to YouTube? Usually it's yes, because teachers use it instructionally, which is its own problem. But, you know, YouTube is a deep hole of never ending content. And if a kid has access to it and their choice is to read an assignment on their internet-based platform or watch a YouTube video, what are you going to, I mean, it's it's candy or broccoli, right? Like, what kid is going to pick broccoli? I'm sure there are a few, but like,
well,
that's a problem.
An interesting question. And this is something that doesn't come up very much in the conversation, but because there have been times, and maybe there are times, and there are people, whatever, for whom you get enough candy, you start to crave some broccoli.
Yeah.
Right. So might there be, and I have, you know, young adult children at home who, they were born in the early 2000s. So right before all of this happened, who see what's going on.
Yes.
And my daughter in particular is like, you know, I think my generation is going to turn this around because we see it.
I agree.
And we don't like it.
Yes. I love it. Is she Gen Z? Probably.
Yes. She's born in 2006. So,
yeah. And my son's 2008 and my daughter's 2011. And so she's alpha gen. The pendulum is swinging. I mean, in the right direction in my mind, you know, and we're constantly correcting and overcorrecting. I sort of talk about parenting as like zigzagging, you know, we sort of hope it averages out somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's good. I mean, I do think it's good that the pendulum is swinging. I think Gen Z is like, what did you do to us? And, you know, let alone, their childhood was bookended by 9/11 and COVID. We've got school shootings, we've got all kinds of chaos in the world. Like, they have not had exactly a stable environment in terms of what's going on worldwide. And so, yes, I have such hope. It's so cliche, but I believe that children are our future. But we cannot, in the second part of that line is teach them well and let them lead the way. We cannot teach them well if what we're teaching them is all digitized in the absence, in the vacuum of no relationship. I worry about the lack of critical thinking that comes with providing such frictionless tech as a solution to education, that what we're doing is raising future, robots or automatons, things that are going to show up in a workplace and be told what to do. And, yeah, jobs of the future may include that, but
which is
not
an
good.
Interesting point, actually, because if you go back to like the creation of public school, that is actually what they wanted people to do.
Well, then I guess we're consistent, right? We're still producing what we, right. And I believe in the importance of public education in terms of access for all children, right? That's what makes public education so powerful. So it really makes me concerned that we are, it's not that the schools are pushing propaganda. I don't want to suggest like direct A to Z or A to B. It's more A to Z, but like by not providing them with opportunities for critical thinking, by making things too easy, by saying you'll never lose your homework, so you don't have to know what that experience of that logical consequence is, you're not setting a kid up for future workplace success. And that, I see that as a threat to democracy. I know that's a really big thought, but it matters, and we want our kids to be able to engage with people that they don't always agree with. I think that's an incredibly important thing. And when we silo off into our own little digital worlds, we stay nice and happy and cozy and comfortable. That's not great. So
there's one other kind of, not point, but whatever anecdote that I wanted to share, which when we give kids the world in their pockets, but when we give kids the world in their pocket at school in particular, a friend of mine's 11, 12-year-old was having iPad time and stumbled upon some pornography.
Oh yes, I'm glad you mentioned this.
Yeah. And I'm so glad we're talking about porn.
Yes.
And my friend is fortunate enough to have the kind of relationship with her daughter where her daughter disclosed this to her mother.
Yes. Yes.
I happen to think, and I think the statistics would bear this out, most kids do not have a kind of relationship with their parent where they would disclose this because they would be afraid of either getting in trouble, their teacher getting in trouble, whatever.
Yes. Yes.
And we also know that seeing developmentally inappropriate material, particularly pornography, but also violence and other kinds of things, can be potentially very damaging to children. Absolutely. And this happened, again, I really want to stress, this happened in a school where they had quote unquote protections in place. So can we just talk about that for just a sec before we wrap?
That is very common. And I always say to parents or to schools, really, it's not a question of if, it's when. So you have to, whether you want to or not, if your child is interacting with technology at home or at school, have to have the porn conversation or the violence conversation or the, something I don't understand, manipulated, whatever, because it's going to be there. It's not even that kids are seeking it out. I always stress this because parents go, not my child. First of all, children are curious. That's normal. And we don't want to stifle that. But we also have to realize that it is so everywhere. I always give the example. My son was really into Harry Potter when he was like 8. He went on Amazon. He wanted a scarlet robe. Well, you type scarlet robe into Amazon, you get lingerie, right? And like, I was impressed that he knew the word scarlet, right? It wasn't just Harry Potter robe. He was using a, kind of a sophisticated word. But that is so normal. And that was almost 10 years ago. The algorithms are much faster, much smarter, and they base what you search, based on your previous searches. So even if you've accidentally stumbled into something, it's going to remember that and push you more content like it. It is unfortunate. And school districts will say, oh, we've got filters and firewalls and blocks and whatnot. I know someone who is a parent in a public school in another state whose 8-year-old was watching porn on their school district iPad for 2 weeks before the parents realized. The teacher found out, was horrified. They figured out, even though, again, all these firewalls were in place, the kid, super savvy, because kids are savvy and smart and clever and curious, figured out how to use Siri, asking Siri to present pornographic videos because a friend had told him about it. But the part that makes me so angry is the district blamed the parents. So this is where I get mad at districts, because this is not parents' fault. Parents didn't select to give this out. It is, I feel like I've gone off on a tangent here because they're going to see porn. We have to talk. Oh, I know what you said that was so important. What we have to say to our kids when they see this and they come and tell us is, thank you for telling me. I'm sorry that happened. Close your computer, turn off your iPad. I will help figure this out. That is the direct correlation to better mental health than to have a parent-child relationship where you drive them underground or into secrecy, or worse, back to the internet to find out what it was that they were looking at. That is not where we want kids to go. We need to be able to answer their questions and say, this internet is not designed for children. There's just a lot of stuff on here that's not for kids. And when you see something, I need you to tell me, and I will never be mad at you. We have to have that message.
I want to press pause because I want the listeners to go back and listen to the last 30 seconds of this conversation, because you totally shifted your energy when you were amping up about districts and we were sort of in conversation about, the problems. And immediately when you were imagining yourself, and I do this too, that's why I'm pointing it out. When you were imagining yourself speaking to a child about an issue, you got super calm. You got super slow. And I want you to say the script again.
Yes.
So that parents can really sear it into.
Yes. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry you saw that. I'm sorry you found this. I will never be mad at you. You can always come and tell me or ask me a question if you see something that you don't understand. The internet is not designed for children. There's stuff on there that kids aren't supposed to see, etc. Those are broken record again. And we have to have those conversations proactively, like before they do. It can be like, I'm giving you time on frequently, exactly, multiple times a week. And it's like, I'm giving you time on the iPad. I mean, I do this with my daughter and her friends. And, my daughter is almost 13, hates it, but loves it too. I try to be funny, but it's like two of her friends have phones and two of them don't. So but they're out when they're over. I walk by and I'll say, remember there's porn on there. Don't talk to creepy people. Like, it's so obvious that I know that they will never, that they can always come and talk to me about it. And I'll directly ask them. Now, I taught middle school for 12 years, so I feel very comfortable. I'm not afraid of this age group. I think it can be a very intimidating bunch sometimes. But they just sort of roll their eyes. And yet I know that we can talk about it. And they know that I know what they're looking at or not looking at. And that's it. I think we just have to be annoying and obvious and cringe, as the kids would say today. Like, okay, we're not here to be liked. We're parents of, tweens. Like, we're not going to be liked for a few years. They'll come back later and thank us. But for now, we just have to be those parents.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. As per the usual, we could go all day, but we're going to pin it there.
Okay, perfect. I know. Again, I feel like this is a topic we could talk about many times. So you can have me back. New topics come up. Let me know.
Perfect. Emily Cherkin, if people want to learn more about you, how do they do that?
Well, I have a book, which is called The Screen Time Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech-intentional family. But I also do have a newsletter. I write weekly essays, and they're all about parenting and tech and, all of the fun things that come with it. So subscribe to my newsletter. I don't sell it to anyone or spam you. And the irony is not lost on me that I am on social media platforms as well. I have an assistant who helps me create content, but that's another quick place I'll do little drive-by parenting tips.
And all of that is at The Screen Time Consultant.
Yes, my website, thescreentimeconsultant.com. So
Fantastic.
yes,
We will link to
thank you for
all of that.
having me.
Thank you for being
Awesome.
here, and
My pleasure.
talk to you soon.
Take care.